The cargo bay reeked of burnt metal and something organic, something dying. Evan Trace pressed his palm against the bulkhead door, feeling the faint vibrations of the abandoned station's failing life support systems. The Xanthari had evacuated 3 cycles ago, leaving behind nothing but scrap, broken weapons, and whatever they deemed too worthless to salvage. Standard procedure for a retreating military force. The war had moved to another sector, and this place was now a graveyard. He shouldn't have been here. His salvage permit covered derelict civilian vessels, not military stations. But the distress beacon, weak, barely a whisper on subspace frequencies, had called to something in him. Something he couldn't ignore. Stupid, he thought. This is how salvagers die. The door hissed open, releasing a gust of stale air that made his eyes water. Emergency lighting bathed the interior in crimson, and the floor was slick with something he didn't want to identify. Evan activated his helmet's filter and stepped inside, his boots crunching on debris. That's when he heard it. A low, guttural growl that raised every primitive instinct in his mammalian brain. It wasn't a sound meant to communicate, it was a sound meant to warn. Stay back. Come closer and die. Evan's hand moved to the plasma cutter on his belt. Not a weapon, not really, but it could cut through bulkhead plating. It could probably cut through flesh, too. He found her in the corner of what had once been a holding pen. Lysara Vorn. He didn't know her name then, but he could see what she was, a Xanthari warbeast. A creature engineered across generations to be the perfect predator. She was massive, nearly 3 meters long, with midnight black fur that seemed to absorb the emergency lighting. Her 6 legs were splayed awkwardly, 3 of them bent at unnatural angles. Cybernetic implants jutted from her spine, neural dampeners, combat stims, behavioral regulators, all of them flickering or dead. Her yellow eyes locked onto him with an intelligence that made his breath catch. She wasn't just an animal. Easy, Evan whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand standard. Easy. Lysara's lips peeled back, revealing rows of serrated teeth designed to shred armor plating. A warning, but beneath the growl Evan heard something else, a whimper. Thin and desperate, he angled his helmet light downward. 3 cubs. They were tiny things, barely the size of his forearm, nestled against their mother's belly. Their fur was mottled gray and black, their eyes still closed. One wasn't moving. Oh, hell, Evan breathed. The Xanthari had left them. Of course they had. Warbeasts were expensive to breed and train, but they were still just tools. When a tool broke, you left it behind. The fact that this particular tool had given birth in captivity was irrelevant. The cubs would die with her. Lysara's growl intensified, and she tried to lunge, but her broken legs betrayed her. She collapsed with a sharp yelp of pain, her body convulsing. The cybernetic implant sparked, sending jolts of electricity through her nervous system. Punishment for disobedience. Even dying, the Xanthari's control mechanisms were still active. Evan had seen a lot of ugly things in his 5 years as a salvager. He'd pulled bodies from destroyed colony ships. He'd watched pirates execute prisoners because ransom negotiations took too long. But this calculated cruelty, this abandonment, it settled like lead in his gut. He could leave. Should leave. Lysara Vorn was a predator bred to kill humans. Her species had torn through Alliance colonies during the early war years, before the Xanthari switched tactics. The scars on his left shoulder were a reminder of that. A close encounter with a Xanthari patrol that had nearly ended him. One of the cubs mewed. A sound so fragile it could have come from a kitten. Damn it, Evan muttered. He unsealed his emergency pack and pulled out a medical scanner. Lysara watched him with those unnerving yellow eyes. Her body tensed despite the pain. She didn't trust him. Why would she? Humans and Xanthari had been enemies for 2 decades. I'm not going to hurt you, Evan said, keeping his voice low and steady. I know you don't understand me, but I'm not going to hurt you. He approached slowly, each step deliberate. Lysara's growl became a continuous rumble, but she didn't try to lunge again. Maybe she understood on some level that he wasn't reaching for a weapon. Maybe she was just too weak to care. The scanner's readout made Evan wince. 3 fractured limbs, internal bleeding, severe neural trauma from the malfunctioning implants, and malnutrition. She'd been left here for at least a week, maybe more, with no food or water. The fact that she was still alive was a testament to her engineered resilience. You're tougher than you look, Evan murmured. He pulled out a multi-tool and examined the neural implants. They were Xanthari military grade, encrypted and hardened against tampering. But Evan had spent years reverse engineering alien tech. He knew how to bypass most systems. "This is going to hurt," he warned, though she couldn't understand. He jammed the tool into the primary implant and twisted. Sparks flew and Lysara let out a roar that echoed through the cargo bay. Her body arched, muscles spasming, and then the implant went dark. The growling stopped. Lysara collapsed, panting, her eyes wide with something that might have been shock. For the first time since he'd entered the bay, she looked at him without hostility, just confusion. Evan didn't waste time. He injected her with a broad-spectrum painkiller and coagulant, then splinted her broken legs with materials from his pack. It wasn't much, but it would keep her stable until he could get her to his ship. The cubs were easier. 2 were weak but responsive. The third, he checked its pulse and found nothing. Gently, he moved the tiny body aside. Lysara watched him, and for a moment, Evan could have sworn he saw grief in those alien eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. He fashioned a makeshift sling from cargo netting and carefully transferred the 2 surviving cubs into it. Lysara growled again, but it was half-hearted. She was too exhausted to protest. Getting her onto the grav sled was a nightmare. Even injured, she weighed nearly 200 kilos. But Evan managed, and he activated the sled's repulsors. It lifted smoothly, humming as it compensated for the load. "Come on," Evan said, gripping the sled's handle. "Let's get you out of here." Lysara's eyes followed him as he moved toward the exit. She didn't growl, didn't snarl. She just watched, as if trying to understand why this human, this soft-voiced, fragile creature, had chosen to save her. Evan didn't have a good answer for that. Maybe it was guilt for the sins of his species. Maybe it was the memory of his own dog, a scruffy mutt named Rusty who died when Evan was 12. Or maybe it was just the simple, stubborn human refusal to let something innocent suffer when he could do something about it. Whatever the reason, as Evan guided the grav sled through the derelict station and back toward his ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a decision that would change everything. Behind him, Lysara Vorn closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, allowed herself to rest. She didn't know if she could trust this human, but for now, she didn't have a choice, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough.